everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast from Backlot Banter, where we look at all 10 Best Picture nominees and pick which ones, or I guess in our case, which 3 right now we think is the very best. That's right, it's Quest for the Bestest. I'm Timo, joined by Abram, Tanner, and Tucker, and today we will be discussing The Banshees of Inisherin by Martin McDonagh, from this year, of course, starring Colin Farrell, Brendan Gleeson, Kerry Condon. This is a film that I think has picked up a little bit of steam and has a lot of stuff that is worthy of discussion, worthy of a meaty Quest episode. So hopefully we can give it what it deserves today. But before we dive in and cut the fat off and really discover what this movie is all about, we got to recap what we talked about last time, because last time we were in the Baz Luhrmann mode, discussing Elvis, the Luhrmannisms, the lack of subtleism, what we thought of the film. A music biopic? No? You should go watch the episode. That's all I've got to tell you. But the film got an 8.5. So the two numbers on our list, 9.2 and 8.5, we decided that...
Which one will Banshees get?
Yeah, there's only two options right now. But Elvis got an 8.50 because we've really got to lean on the computer to do our deciding for us this season. But it's at the bottom of the list at place number 5. So where will Banshees go? I don't have a clue. I have no idea where it's going to go on this list. But that's the goal of today, is to find that out. But before we do it, we got one more thing to go through. A featured comment that Abram has on his handy-dandy cellular phone.
Yes. This comes from our Avatar episode, and our treasured son, John Toreleven, back in the spotlight once again with something of an essay, which I'll read out for you now.
Is it as long as the last episodes? That was too long.
No, not quite, but he writes, love your discussion. Saw it in the theater this week, and I loved it. James Cameron really is the world champion in doing spectacles, but at the same time, I felt a bit cheated. The story was essentially the same as the last movie. Annoying one-dimensional colonel hates Jake Sully. He died in the first movie, we thought, but oh no, they brought him back. I love the ecosystem stuff they touched upon, but it was not enough. The movie is still only about annoying colonel versus Jake Sully. And that's the thing with Cameron. He is the best at doing spectacular visual movies, but he's not a good storyteller IMO. I think he peaked with Aliens and Terminator 2, and I think he had screenwriting help on those, but the movies since have been very weak story-wise. Titanic is literally a disaster in the way I'm sure Cameron didn't intend. Visually, of course, that was a ride. Cameron tricked me again. But if the 3 movies to come will be, quote, Annoying Colonel Hates Jake Sully parts 3, 4, 5, end quote, I'll be super disappointed. Please, James, bring in some screenwriting help. Double exclamation point. But will I go watch them? Yes, of course I will. Interesting thing what Timo said about the rule of coolness. I think this movie is too cool for its own good. 7.5 out of 10 for me. Tar next.
Too cool for school.
Man.
John Tor, our treasured son, great comment, but also that thing about Titanic, is that a disaster of a story? Is that the Titanic have a bad story? Is that a common
well, I think it's a pun because the story of the Titanic is a disaster, if you think.
Well, true, but like there's subtext there.
But if you remember, he was not crazy, because we read out his comment back in the day when we reviewed Titanic, and he was way 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago about he was way harsher on the film than we are. By the way, I'm seeing that on Tuesday now. We had to move it twice. But goddamn if I'll miss Titanic in the theaters. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Banshees of Inisherin. Who wants to give a little plot synopsis for what happens and who says what in this movie?
I'll handle it, Timo.
Tanner, go right ahead.
Okay. So we find ourselves in 1923 Ireland, or more specifically, an island off the coast of Ireland called Inisherin. And we have 2 men who are seemingly the best of friends, Padraig and Colm. But suddenly, as we follow Padraig, we find out that Colm no longer wants to hang out with them. And over the course of the film, we did come to discover that that's really because he finds Padraig boring now and dull and wants to move forward with his life and do something that means something and will last, namely creating a piece of film that didn't exist. Well, it did exist yet. Creating a piece of music, rather, for the violin and things by... Excuse me. things spiral out of control, and egos are hurt and built up, and friendships turn into enemy ships, and ultimately, some things go up in flames. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I watched the movie.
Yeah, we all watched the movie, actually. I never will know what to do with those plot synopses, if I should be like, ooh, a bit of sizzle, or just like straight up say what happened in the movie because we all watched it. 'Cause my inclination is to be like, and then some things happen, but we all watched the movie.
And we never try to avoid spoilers in these.
No. I don't know why I do
You
that.
never even indicated that. It's like, oh, sorry guys, there's Titanic spoiler episode. Uh-oh.
The donkey eats the finger, the house gets burned down, Barry Keoghan drowns in the river, and the movie ends.
And the movie
There we
ends.
go.
And the old woman is a ghost or whatever.
Exactly.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did it.
There we go. Now that all that nonsense about what happens in this movie is over with, what did you guys think of it?
Abram, how about you go? You've got this. You've literally got the movie on the screen behind you.
literally do.
That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I thought the Banshees of Inisherin was excellent. I found myself really taken by this by two things principally: the script and the cinematography. I think that what's interesting to me about the film is that it feels very inconsequential as it begins, and it takes time, I think, to really build itself up to have any sort of stakes. But from the very beginning, I was immediately taken by the beauty of the fictional island of Inisherin. I'm not going to be tricked twice about what's real and what's fake in these.
Did you have to Google it?
I did a little bit of research actually about the Irish
Yeah.
Civil War, which I'm sure we'll talk about as a component of this film. But from the very beginning, I was taken by the sights and then taken by the script. I think that these characters are excellent. I think the performances are excellent. And we take what feels like just a couple guys being jokesters and turn it into what I feel is one of the most emotionally charged films that's up for Best Picture this year. So I was, given that I loved In Bruges, not a surprise, but I was quite smitten with Banshees.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
I'll go next. Why not?
Go for it, Timo.
I like this movie. I don't know if I'm like over the moon about it, but I did enjoy it. And I felt that you're right, Abram. It is very emotionally affecting, and I found myself really empathizing with Patrick in this film, and feeling sad for him. And I found that the humor, the wry humor that this film uses, is funny, and I'm chuckling along while I'm watching it, and that balance of the comedic aspect in which it's funny, but it's not like uproariously funny. It's just like you're like, yeah, this is a good those were funny lines, and this is a funny circumstance. But the film isn't like telling me to laugh like some other films will do. But at the same time, it's also a very sad movie. It's about this disconnect that grows between these two men that they can't get over, or that they can in the end. They can be frenemies at the end. I don't really quite know how I'd think about the ending.
Sure.
And I also think the film is stunningly beautiful. This location is just like otherworldly in its quality and just the light and the way it shines. But I think that the film, I don't know, is there something missing from it, or something missing from my viewing? It's maybe as we dive into like the characters and the themes a little bit more, I'll come to understand a bit more about the film. But right now, because I only saw it for the first time for this review, I feel like I have a very surface level viewing and interpretation of it. And perhaps I can dive in and find a lot more about the film. But right now, I'm just like, that was a good movie. That's kind of how I think.
Yeah. I'm in a similar boat. It's interesting because this was my second time watching it. We got a chance to see it in theaters when it came out, and I certainly enjoyed it a lot. But I came out on the other side in our initial review being like, yeah, that was good, but I expected to love it, and I didn't. And I watched it the second time. I'm like, okay, you know what? We're sitting down. It's time. I'm watching Banshees again. This is one of the movies of the year. And I came out the other side. I'm like, I liked it, but I wished I loved it. And I think I'm in the similar boat to you, Timo, is that I don't think there's any flaws with this movie, but it doesn't feel particularly remarkable to me. It's like, yeah, it's a very good movie. And I like the characters, and I love the cinematography and the culture and the uniqueness of its setting and its culture and tone. But it doesn't really stick out too heavily to me. It's a very good movie, but it doesn't crack into my favorites of the year anywhere even close.
Yeah. I mean, I also, as Tucker said, we initially reviewed this one when we saw it in theaters, and I liked it roughly about the same. I would think. I don't think my thoughts or feelings about it developed anything or anywhere substantially on it. But yeah, I really just would find myself parroting what you guys have been saying. I think the tone is very unique to Martin McDonagh's style of writing. I found myself because I watched this one with my girlfriend, and she's like, "Oh, is it a sad movie?" Because it sounds like it. I'm like, "Well, no, but yes." At the same time, it is I'm like, "It's a comedy." She's like, "Oh, it's a comedy." I'm like, "It's a comedy, kind of."
Kind of.
But it's so charged with like depression and angst and just like longing for something more that I have a hard time calling it like a comedy. It has jokes. It's a very funny film, but I have a hard time calling it, "Oh yeah, this is a comedy film." You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
Well,
where
let
would
me rattle off the noms here.
yeah, let's do the noms and then we can get into the meat of it.
What's really interesting about the Banshees of Inisherin as a presence at the Academy Awards this year is that it is tied for the second most nominated film at the ceremony, with All Quiet on the Western Front, which is sort of like a maximalist, technical, across the board film, whereas Banshees is very simple in its story, simple in its presentation, very few limited number of characters, and really only a single setting, basically this coastline town. But regardless, we Banshees of Inisherin was nominated for Best Picture. I can't, if you can believe it, fellas.
If you
it was
can
you.
believe it.
God.
Colin Farrell was nominated for a lead actor performance. Brendan Gleeson and Barry Keoghan were both nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Carrie Condon was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. It was also nominated for Achievement in Directing for Martin McDonagh, Original Screenplay for Martin McDonagh, Film Editing, Original Score, and I believe that is it. I think I got them
No
all there.
cinematography?
No cinematography for this one.
Cinematography very very stacked this year. There's a couple snubs.
Yeah,
That's a
there's
big
a few.
one, I think.
It is a big one.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but lots of above the line nominations here. 4 acting nominations, writing, directing, lots of stuff up top there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically everything a film could possibly get.
And you
also,
yeah,
mainly the reason why it's tied with Everything Everywhere is because that also has Picture Director for Acting awards.
well, Everything Everywhere has 11. It's tied with All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh, my bad. Why
Yeah.
it's up there?
Yes,
It's
yes.
got 4.
But it's in a
acting
lot of those same
nominations.
categories, and is really the competition for Everything Everywhere in screenplay.
Yeah. Where I want to start with, since this film was nominated for 4 performances. Let's start there,
Yeah.
and we can use that to wedge our way into this story, into the themes of the film. Colin Farrell, I think, does an amazing job of communicating Patrick. He is Patrick in this film. I see him as a character that, well, first, Colin Farrell, seen him in other movies, in Bruges, so like there's
Other
this,
movies this year,
yeah,
or in 2022 rather.
Daredevil.
there's this like, I feel like he's an actor that I can view as like the actor, but then when he does a really good performance, like dissolves into the role. And this one is the latter camp. I really just feel the human interpersonal connections that he has, and the longing that, and like the just kind of like befuddlement. This character is so interesting in that like he is stupid, and everyone calls him stupid behind his back, and he like
Oh no, they say don't.
they say don't, but it's the same thing.
He's dull. He's dull.
When he becomes wise to that, I feel like that is like such a well conceived acting moment, like setting up your character to have these different forces that when they meet, and then you get a performance where you get to watch a dude ask his sister, be like, "Do you think I'm dumb?" And she then has to struggle because she kind of does think, but she doesn't want to tell him. And then I think the script plus the acting works to make a lot of really incredible moments of film, and that I think really are I don't know. There's not a verb for foundationalized by the. They are built upon a strong foundation of script writing and acting.
I see. Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely, as we're all probably going to agree here, that's the strength of this movie, is portraying simple interpersonal communication issues and hiding things and having petty arguments. Those moments are what sell this movie, outside of its humor moments and its cinematography and those sort of things. But I think the reason that this movie works for me is unfortunately not Colin Farrell. I think he does a very good job, but he's the least interesting character to me out of our four core characters, all of whom were nominated for acting awards. And he's a very simple guy, and I think there's an intrigue to that. I think Colin Farrell plays that very well, but he is dumb, and he moves his cows around, and it goes to the bar, and like that is like the bare bones like 3-point structure of like, okay, I have a character, but he kind of feels like he should be a background character almost. Like he should be a side character that you run into a couple times across the course of the story. But he is the protagonist of this film. He's the one that we follow from the very beginning to the end. And I find that to be an interesting creative choice, but I think it's also part of what distances me from loving this film. I think that every other character has more intrigue, more personality to me. And even though I like Colin Farrell a lot, I don't see the flabbergastingly amazing Oscar-winning potential performance that other people do. I think he's good. I think he's very good. But I've liked him more in other things. And I think he's just completely outshone here by everyone else around him.
See, I disagree with that, and I think for me the reason that Banshees is such a remarkable film is it sort of is about just being a mundane person, and we don't get that too often. I think what's really interesting about Colin Farrell's performance is that he's got such a range that he exhibits, despite the fact that ultimately the film is about, at the most core level, his older friend who's playing the fiddle doesn't like him anymore. Mm-hmm. And he goes around, as you're saying, Tucker, and pokes his cows and does his little life and goes and drinks at the pub, and we learn from Siobhan that he's there like every night, and then he's that's what he does. He spent 2 hours talking to Colm about what was in his donkey's shit. That's part of the
no, it was his pony shite.
Shows how much you were paying attention.
Right. Look at this multi-layered Banshees reference we're making, and I think that's quite refreshing. And in that mundanity, Colin Farrell, I think, brings a dimension out of it that makes him more than just the guy who moves the cows around and goes to the pub and is having his friendship fall apart. I think of the moment when, as the film is ending, as Siobhan says that I'm leaving and I'm going across to mainland Ireland and you're going to be here by yourself. And he's hugging her and they're crying. And then he goes, "You'll come back soon, Siobhan." And then she doesn't say anything, and you just hear him go, "Well, why can't you say yes?" And I think there's this really empathetic and honest emotional core to his performance that deepens the mundanity that I think you're referring to, Tucker. And it's the fact for me that Banshee has started those interesting lines in which, he's just a cow farmer, but he's also a cow farmer whose best friend is cutting off his fingers and throwing them on his door. And he's a cow farmer that's going to end the film literally in flames by burning down this man's house. It's these contrasts, and I think it's Colin Farrell's ability to pull the emotions out of those contrasts that make it also believable and enriching. I actually think, having had not seen Banshees before, seeing it now, this is as compelling a performance as what Austin Butler did in Elvis, which we discussed last week. And I do see why he's been lauded so heavily. I think, for me, he really does make the film work for all of its sort of incredibly disparate elements.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about that is you talk about how he's being awarded here, Abram. He's winning a lot of critics awards. A lot of critics associations are giving Colin Farrell their top lead actor prize, which I find interesting because I think he does give a uniquely subtle performance, and I think it was built in for him in the script, because Pedrick is a uniquely unremarkable man, and I think that's what, as you're talking about, that's what makes him so interesting when he's thrown into the mess of circumstances that is this film, that all of a sudden, for seemingly no logical reason, his best friend stops talking to him and starts cutting off his fingers and throwing them at his door. And he's
what we would all do.
Mm-hmm. I think so, yeah.
But he
has to associate with like the village idiot, essentially. I'm gonna keep charging through this conversation that's happening on the side. But he has to make friends with the village idiot, and he's really coming to terms with how people view him, since he doesn't have his best friend anymore, and his sister is leaving, and there's also there's a civil war going across the way over there, and it really throws into perspective how complacent he is, and subsequently we can all be in our personal lives, and how that can so easily spin out of control when you pull out one little Jenga piece, essentially, and how that transforms him. You know, he goes through a range of like personal or personality changes and trying to win his best friend back, and eventually becomes just as dark and jaded as Colm is, burning his house down, saying, you know, I'm never gonna forgive you for this, yada yada yada. And I do think it is a really interesting performance. I wouldn't call it my favorite of the year by any stretch of the imagination, but I think he is quite good.
Yeah, and I think maybe I was being a little too harsh earlier. I said I still do like him. I think that everything you're saying about it is why this movie is distinct. It is why it's unique. It's about mundanity. It's about struggling through the most basic interpersonal conflicts that you could have, but like extrapolated out in comedically over the top ways. And that's what gives it that Martin McDonagh flair. If there weren't the fingers being cut off and there wasn't the house being burned down at the end, it would just be like a kind of quiet Irish drama. But Martin McDonagh, in his In Bruges and Seven Psychopaths-ness, can go in and spice it up with these funny moments that are darkly comedic, and that's the flavor that I love personally out of Martin McDonagh. And I like that he is giving himself a range. He can go from In Bruges and Seven Psychopaths or to Three Billboards and Banshees, which are much simpler, more contemplative films, and you still feel that satirical, dark humor energy behind it. But I think that strength of Martin McDonagh's screenwriting, and where I feel this film does do its best in being distinct in those dark humor moments, those for me are centered around the other characters, which is why, even though I like Podrick, I like what Colin Farrell's doing, he is outshone by the other three characters because they all have more exaggerated character traits. One of them is cutting off his fingers and doesn't want to talk to his best friend. His sister has to deal with this, and I find her to be like a really interestingly complex character. And our boy from Eternals is over there just being the silliest motherfucker on the planet. And I love all three of them in terms of the nuance of their characters and the energy that their performances bring. Unfortunately, for me at least, the film focuses so heavily on Podrick. It's a very balanced film. I don't want to say like, oh my god, these guys never get any screen time, but it focuses more so on Podrick, and I find him to be the least interesting piece of the puzzle. And maybe that's intentional, and maybe that's where this film's like mundane identity comes from, but I just always want to keep returning to what everyone else is doing around him.
Yeah. I think he's the audience in is the thing. And I also gotta say, great eyebrow acting from Colin Farrell. I just keep coming back to the very first conversation.
I actually have very similar eyebrows.
I know, I was about to say, Tucker, could you try to do like the eyebrow like pushing up against each other that he does when they're having that first conversation outside the bar, and I can't do it with mine, but they get like really close and like temple up against each other like that.
Eyebrow acting is hard, man. I'm trying to do it right now.
Eyebrow acting is very hard.
It's difficult.
Yeah. It is difficult. You know what? That's why he's gonna win the Oscar this year. I actually don't. I don't think he's gonna win. I'd say Austin and Brendan over him for sure. But it is a 3-horse race this year, which is interesting.
Well,
I do think to Tucker's point, the reason, and to sort of transition off of this point then about Colin Farrell, but to me it sort of reinforces what feels like a really authentic emotional peril when the main character is being outshone, quote unquote, by the people around him. To me, that sort of reinforces his situation in his own community and deepens, to me, the sort of despair as he's trying to figure out where he belongs. And I do love the moments, and we get a couple of them where he's confronting Colm and basically pushing Colm to see, okay, are these fingers really coming off? What's really the situation? Is my friend still even here anymore? And that's very genuine, I think. The
his
moment,
confusion in all of those things. He's like, literally, why are you doing this? I don't understand.
Yeah, and there's the two moments in particular. The first one, he gets drunk off whiskey, and he confronts Colm when he's with the abusive sheriff. And they have that confrontation. And then the second one, where he bursts into Colm's house and sits down and talks to him about finishing his piece, The Banshees of Inisherin, and then saying, "Oh, I'm going to run ahead to the pub and I'll meet you there," and then hours pass and hours pass. It's very relatable. I don't really. I think the idea that you feel like the people around you are more interesting, you don't belong, or something's wrong. That's just a human. That's a human note, I think. And to me,
Speak for yourself.
Sure. And I think the fact that he is our entry point into it allows the other characters to be heightened in a way that feels important. I don't think that a Banshees of Inisherin that stars someone as sort of theatrical, how about as the characters around him, would be as compelling. Because even Siobhan, as you're saying, Tucker, is a very understated character. And I think it's the fact that there's almost like this, the epicenter of the film is this normal man. Then his sister is normal, but a bit more confident, a bit more mysterious, perhaps, whatever you want to ascribe to her.
She strives for more, is I think what the thing is that Patrick is complacent. He's perfectly happy to live his life as he's lived it for the past 40 years.
Yeah, and then as you sort of get further out from his circle, you start to bring these other people into the wake. There would be Barry Keoghan and Brendan Gleeson, and to me, that's a compelling way to get to those characters, because it really is, in my opinion, what Colin Farrell gets out of them that makes them so interesting. Like I love seeing him develop this relationship with Barry Keoghan's name is what, Dominic?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Dominic. Yeah.
Because Dominic is just this complete, like, shithead punk who's got this very sensitive side, as we learned down the riverbank. But the moment when he's having dinner with Pedrick and with Siobhan, and he's just this loud, rude, obnoxious young man, and you just have Pedrick sitting there like, not reacting. I think it's the fact that he's there that heightens the drama in that scene. So I personally really love touching these other characters through Pedrick.
Well, should we?
What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say we should talk about Brendan Gleeson's performance.
Let's do it.
He's the other side of the coin of this movie. So yeah, what do you guys think of him?
I think what's interesting about our good boy Colm Sonny Larry is that he's
not his name, by the way.
They always call him that, like, consistently, and I'm like, where does that Sonny Larry thing come from?
He's a real Sonny Larry.
I think he's
why.
credited
Is that a term?
as
I don't know.
Colm Doherty.
Colm Doherty. Yeah.
Oh,
But they call him
Doherty.
Colm Sonny Larry. So that's like not an incorrect way to refer to him.
Yeah,
Like, his
no.
friends refer to him. I digress. I think he's the most exaggerated character, even though Dominic, I would say, is like probably more traditionally like a wacky character. In his like stoicness and just like sitting there and like not really making much of a face and then going to the extreme lengths that he does, I think we get a really complex guy out of him. But I do think that like my issues with Colin Farrell as Patrick is I wish there was more balanced screen time so we learned more about Colm. It almost feels like even though he's kind of the crux of the conflict of this film, we don't see that much of him. He's off like in the distance or like across the bar for the vast majority of the film, and I'm always like, I want to listen in to what he's talking about. I want to listen in. I want to know his thought process a little better, because I think it is in those moments that this movie shines its brightest, is when we're learning about what his own internal struggle of realizing that his life has kind of amounted to nothing and he wants to have some peace and quiet and make his mark on the world. This is where the themes of the film frankly come in, of like losing your identity, of having this midlife crisis and recognizing that your place in the world isn't quite what you thought it was. Like that in with Brendan Gleeson's performance and his character is the most interesting part of this film thematically and writing wise. And I really love those moments. I just wish we got them. I just wish we got more of them, to be honest.
Yeah. And Tucker, can I tell you something? Martin McDonagh tricked you, Tucker. You're directly in the shoes of Patrick, because he wants to know more about Colm as well. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I was actually interestingly caught about a 5-minute video of some compiled deleted scenes from this film on YouTube this morning. And they just compiled like the finished stuff, so it's nothing like super grandiose, I think. And I think probably everything that's intended to be in the movie is largely in the film. There is one scene.
This is the Banshees director cut.
Yeah, it is. Essentially, yes. There's one scene where you see like Colm like having trouble composing a piece of music. that isn't, it's not a long scene, but maybe it's part of a longer thing. I couldn't say. But it does really seem like, he's a supporting actor. He's a supporting character in this film. He is the best friend who is now broken off from Patrick, and we're left to wonder why. And we do get a handful of scenes between him and other characters. And I think what Brendan Gleeson really brings to his performance in all of his scenes in this film is that quiet discontent, that quiet depression that is in this, that crisis that you were talking about. And he doesn't necessarily know what he wants either. He wants to make something that lasts, but why, really? He's like, I might as well do this. It seems like the logical solution to these feelings that I'm having, but he doesn't seem like absolutely resolute in that belief. He just seems lost and at a loss for what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that what makes his character so interesting is his ambiguity and our lack of understanding. And I found myself like guessing alongside Patrick about like what, he makes a guess as to what is happening, and I also am forwarding some notion about why Colum is doing this stuff. And I think that you're right, Tanner, as the film progresses, these themes of the quiet depression and kind of this island life really I guess, developing how these men think about their whole lives and how they aren't happy, and about how, Pedrick is not super happy. I mean, he is very happy because he's very content, but Colum is not happy at all. In this tiny little podunk, like, know nothing town where all there is to do is drink at the pub. And
as far as I can tell, that's like the only like building other than houses in specifically the town of Inisherin.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, but they like drive like
they do
30 minutes away to go there.
But Timo, the reason I laughed a little bit when you said he's so happy is because I remembered the very opening of the film. Comparative to the rest of the film is so funny in retrospect, because it's Patrick like walking by the dock. There's like a rainbow in the background. He's smiling. He's like going about his life, because that's who he is.
Moment.
He's like, my life is as I've known it for the past 40 years, and I'm totally content and elated with that fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're confronted with the character who isn't, and I think that as sad as I'm saddened by Patrick's character and how he reacts to what goes on around him, but I'm more saddened by Brendan Gleeson's character in how he just seems his actions seem irrational, and they seem driven from a place of greater hurt and of greater pain. And so I feel more empathy for him, because I'm like, something's up that he's not saying to anybody. That is why he's really doing this. And, we can make a guess, but the film doesn't tell us by the end of it. It kind of puts forward a pretty clear idea, but we aren't confirmed in how, in thinking what's going on with this guy.
Yeah, I'm there's a shot very early on in the film I like. I believe it's when Pedrick goes to Colum's house for the first time and doesn't respond about going to the pub. It's this shot through the window, and we rack focus from Colum sitting in his chair to the window, and then the ocean is reflected onto the window, and you can no longer see Colum. And windows end up becoming very important to this film. There are windows and glass, because there's a mirror, and a shattered mirror becomes important as we end. And there's this idea, I think, that the film is presenting about sort of distance between people. And to your point, Tucker, I think we very intentionally don't get through that window that's illustrated very early on. And I think that's a complicated notion, and it sort of goes back to how the film feels very genuine to me, because we meet people that we're close to, and then something goes wrong and we don't know what happens, and then things just end. But you have to intuit, as Timo was saying, and I think there's so many moments where we, even though there's that window between us and Colm, we get a sense that even though we don't have a justification, we know that Colm is confused. Not in the way that Pedrick is confused by Colm, but Colm himself doesn't know what's going on. when Pedrick confronts Colm in his house the second time, and they're talking about dancing with his dog and everything, we see on his face this longing that feels like, oh, I want to go to the pub with you. I want to do this, but I can't.
Yeah.
And I think part of what makes his performance so excellent is what he shows on his face, or consequently doesn't show, when we return through the window and we see him smoking a cigarette as his house is burning down around him. And he's just blank. I think in our inability to understand Colm, he becomes a very alluring character. So I really like that, and I think Brendan Gleeson brings a lot to that performance.
Yeah.
Just like
absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Tucker.
Okay, and what I would say about him is that there is like multiple sides to his character, and we're able to see glimpses of the joy and the energy that he does have for life when he's not around Padraig, which is such an interesting. I mean, that's the crux of the film. It was like, how does this distance and this grudge and this pettiness that they're holding against one another, how does that impact the way that they interact, the way that they are when they're separated? What are they thinking when they're separated versus when they're together? And I really love seeing the change that Brendan Gleeson puts on Colm's face when he's having a good time playing the fiddle with a bunch of people at the pub or being at church or whatever. And, he's living his life. He's distanced from Padraig, and he's content. He's happy with pushing things forward and meeting new people. And then when Padraig walks in the room and the smile sort of disappears from his face, and you see his brow furrow, and he's like, okay, now I have to deal with this. That, I think, is my favorite moments of acting from Brendan Gleeson, because it's a range on a micro scale of watching this guy's thought process impact the emotions that he's having. He's joyous. He's okay. Maybe all the fingers on his hand are gone, but he's doing this with his fiddle, jamming along to the music, and then the pub door slams open, as it does many a time, and Padraig Shuliban fucking walks in, and then he's like, oh god, now I have to have a conversation with this guy who's kind of adult that I don't really like anymore. That's the Banshees of Inisherin to me, is those moments of watching Colm's emotional turmoil bubble up and go from a nice high to a crashing low. Yeah. I really, really love those moments.
The real Banshees of Inisherin was the friends we tried to kill along the way.
That's a great point.
I think where it gets even more complicated, though, to your point, is that I think the scene that is maybe the most emotionally charged in the entire film is after Pedro gets punched and gets the shit beat out of him by the police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And Colm watches it happen, and then nonetheless picks him up, and wordlessly they ride together to the literal fork in the road.
Yes.
Where Colm goes to the right and Pedrick takes a horse to the left, and not a word is exchanged between them. But Pedrick begins to cry, and I think both of them, the success of their performances, and to me the entire film, is in the word coined by the Viennese quest, and that's subtleism. And I think that's very effective, because I think
we did the complete 180 from last time.
Yeah.
Because I think the other very subtle but nonetheless incredibly effective component of the dynamics between characters is that, for as much as this is about the relationship between Pedrick and Colm, it's also sort of a study of a town of people and sort of how a town of people interact. Because we come to subtly learn sort of what the barkeeps think of the relationship between Pedrick and Colm.
Well, it's the barkeep and his friend who's always sitting there and parrots his words, which is so funny.
Who looks exactly like him, except with a shaved head.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. I don't know.
The great thing about the Banshees of Inisherin, and to me, alongside that dark humor I was talking about, why I do feel, even though I don't love this movie, I do really find it interesting, is that we were talking about how unremarkable this film is on the whole. But that's what makes it feel so unique. Is we're looking into a life on an island, in a culture, in a time period, in another country that is so foreign to us. Is the idea of, we're always on our phones, we have computers, we have friends across the planet.
Millenniums.
Exactly. Millenniums always be on their phones, and we happen to be a part of that. And consuming different kinds of media and learning about the world on a global scale, none of that applies to the Banshees of Inisherin. And learning about the culture of this small Irish town and the ways in which, because it's a small town, everyone knows one another and knows the goings on, and they have to, in order to buy literally anything, they have to make a trek to this one store on this one, on the other side of the island. There's so much granularity in how the film is paced that we're able to sort of map out, even in just the 2 hours that were shown, what is the culture on this island like? There's the bar, there's the church, there's the store, there's the dock, there's a couple of houses, the fields are gigantic, you got the cliffs here. It paints a really complete picture of what this incredibly simple lifestyle could be like, and that allows you to extrapolate both forwards and backwards what these people's lives are like. I mean, you can, even without seeing any of it, easily imagine what Colm and Patrick sitting at the pub talking for 2 hours about pony shite. Like, you can imagine what that is like because you see bits and pieces of what their world is like. And I really find that fascinating, of a look into an incredibly simple but so different from our own culture.
Abram, you mentioned, maybe before we started rolling, but maybe it's in the episode, audience, you'll know, that you had done, that this film inspired you to do a wee bit of research into the Irish Civil War. And now that we've talked about Padraig and Colm, I think it's appropriate to bring up how the relationship mirrors the conflict that we see briefly on the horizon in this film, and is brought up a handful of times after that. Because, Abram, since you did the research, I'll throw it over to you for just like a quick little summary of what the Irish Civil War was and why it's important to this film particularly. If you want to do that.
I'm going to try, Tanner.
Okay, yeah, we're doing a history lesson here.
Don't insult me in the comments. But basically, Ireland, and stop me as soon as I make a mistake.
Stop.
Ireland. Ireland used to be a British territory.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Ireland gains its independence, and then there is a treaty put forth about how territory is going to be divided, and then there is a civil war from 1922 to 23, short-lived, but conflict between the IRA and the other guys, and
people who like the British,
the British, and they are fighting over how the nation of Ireland should define its nationhood and how it should be governed, and the borders is, I believe, the borders of territory is sort of what the conflict is. And I have some friends who I write with who are Irish, and when the film came out, we were tweeting like, yeah, this is a really good movie, but I can't imagine enjoying it to the same extent if I was not Irish and I didn't understand sort of the context of the film. And so in doing a little bit of reading about it, I read I'll send the link to the group chat so we can put it in the description to this Vox piece that very, very simply encapsulates that idea, and encapsulates the idea that essentially Colm and Padraig can be read as these two Irish factions who are brothers, who then, over what is ostensibly a simple difference, in a moment are diametrically opposed antagonists. Yeah. And confused and complicated, and don't understand how to bridge that gap with the other. And it's sort of about the in part the ebbing and flowing of Irish national politics and culture and things like that over the Civil War period, and then the various tumultuous periods in Irish history since then. Again, none of this is my thoughts. It's all stuff that I'll leave in the comments so you guys can read it from somebody smarter than me. But that's a whole nother component to the Banshees of Inisherin that I think is important to sort of contextualize the entire film around.
Yeah, if I can, I wanted to throw my 2 cents in there as well, because I know I didn't read a Wikipedia article or anything like that, but from what I know, it was really, like there was the one side who wanted, greater Irish independence and freedom from the British Crown, and those who were more closely aligned with the Crown. And what that really is, if we're comparing it to these two characters, is Padraig, who's wanting more complacency and something that's more similar to what his life was like in the past, versus Colm, who is, wanting to be more independent, be free from whatever constraints of life he's lived in for the past. I mean, he's older than Padraig, so 60 plus years of his life. And it is those dueling ideologies that bring them to these people who were once so close and now cannot bridge this gap of conflict that has grown between them. And so, I just think that's a really interesting political mirror that this film throws up to a bit of history that is close to the hearts of basically everyone involved with this film. I mean, Colin Farrell, Martin McDonagh, Brendan Gleeson, Barry Keoghan, all Irish. Kerry Condon as well, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
What do you think that this discussion, this like comparison and reading of the film in this political way, like adds to your thematic understanding? Do you think that this is that McDonagh is trying to make a commentary on our current situation, on a unreconcilable difference between two brothers growing out of a small point of contention? Is that applicable to what's going on in the world today, or should the film not be read like that?
I think it
Um,
is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think it is such a evergreen thematic message that it can be applied to basically anything. It can be applied to interpersonal conflicts, as is the focus of this film, or geopolitics in a lot of ways. I think that's why I think it is so thematically resonant with people of all walks of life, people who are Irish or some American boys over here in the good old U.S. of A. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God bless this mess. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that none of us have to go particularly far out of our like circles, be it family, be it friends, to reach a conflict around sort of a political flashpoint in the last,
yeah.
I don't know.
I just gotta go one room over.
God, ain't that the truth?
Tanner Dykstra.
And so I think that is important, but at the same time, I do think that this film is so uniquely Irish that I don't really read any sort of American political cultural conflict into it personally.
Yeah.
What I take away from it more is the macro, or sorry, the micro interpersonal conflict, or the macro idea about sort of what it means to last and what it means to be important and what it means to leave a legacy behind. Because to me...
Also a theme of Babylon.
Sure. To me, not being Irish, not having a connection to that component of the sort of allegory and theme of the film, it is that scene in the pub where we have Colm talking about the music of Mozart being remembered, but the niceness of Pedrick's parents being forgotten in less than 50 years' time. And I think the film is compelling in how it puts forth both of these ideas, but I think that it comes down more inside of Pedrick. He's got that incredible moment where he says, "I am Pedrick and I am kind," or "I am nice," something to that effect, and he walks out. I think that the film is critical of this idea that Colm puts forth about needing to leave something beyond themselves and beyond their memory. I mean, it becomes self-destructive to him, and I'm not sure what you guys think about this, but I think the film pretty clearly comes down on the side of Pedrick. But I think what's interesting is it also corrupts that very niceness that it seems like the film is suggesting is correct. And so I think that's part of why the themes are actually quite complicated in what Banshees is trying to say.
I mean, Pedrick is not nice in many moments. Burning someone's house down, not nice. Telling the dude that your father got run over by a milk van,
rude,
not nice.
Bread van.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same, boy, if it's the same bread van, God, if it's the same bread van.
If it's the same one. Funniest moment in the movie.
We've been talking about the themes and the messaging and the characterization, the dramatic characterization throughout this whole thing. Haven't brought up the jokes, which is fine, because I think that's a less complex discussion than the drama is of it. But that's the funniest joke in the whole movie, is the bread van joke. It's so funny.
Easily.
It takes so long to develop. Like, that joke is like it's like 5 minutes of setup, and then you get. My mother was hit by a bread van, and you're like,
tell me, mommy died. It's the same bread van. I'm gonna kill him. So I think that what you're saying, Abram, is that I agree the film does take sides and say that, like, in enjoying the time that you are given, and being kind and nice to others is an admirable human thing to do, and it's a good way to live your life. And so maybe the corruption of Pedrick is telling us that we have to, like, hold on to that. We have to hold that niceness dear. But maybe that at the same time, not everyone else is going to be nice, and we can't let ourselves be dragged into their meanness and their
the antagonism that they can instill with that is like blatantly present within all of us, but that we have some amount of control over. Maybe that's what it's trying to say. I don't know. I just made all that up right now.
Abram, you did. Thank you for reminding me of the moment in the bar when Patrick is drunk and he's confronting Colm, and he says, "My parents were nice." Because in that the deleted scene compilation I was talking about, there's a scene where Patrick visits his parents' grave, and he changes the flowers out, and he says a single line. He just says, "You are nice." And then, so I'm like, oh yeah, that
fits him.
Yeah, that fits why that was in the movie. Because I was like, oh, I don't know, I don't remember him bringing up his parents in the film, but good call there. I think we should talk about the other two nominated performances of the film: Kerry Condon as Siobhan and Barry Keoghan as Dominic. I want to start with Dominic because Barry Keoghan is my favorite part of this film. He has all the lines that I'm going to remember just because he's so funny in this. And at the same time, there is a darkness to it, as there is with everything funny in this film. There's a darkness to all of his interactions as well. But what do you guys think of Dominic in this film?
I think what's interesting about Dominic putting his character in conversation with what we're talking about in terms of personalities, representing themes, and what the film is saying about those, is that Dominic almost represents someone who's too complacent, and that's to his detriment. He's so forgiving about the situation that he's in, is that he allows his father to beat him senseless, presumably many, many times over the course of his life, and just puts a smile on his face and skips away afterward. And he's like, oh, well, that's just how life is. And I do think that is where the film kind of strikes that thematic middle ground of making fun of him for doing that. It's not a good thing to be so complacent and so forgiving that you just let people take advantage of you and abuse you. But he also he's my favorite performance in the film, as I do think that the amount of tics that he has and the weird ways that he brings out a different energy whenever he walks in the room with anyone is such a breath of fresh air for this movie. I feel like Dominic showing up instantly rockets my entry in the scene. And of course, that's very subjective. And as I said earlier, I'm not like the biggest Colm Doherty or Patrick Sullivan fan, but Dominic, even though I don't agree with him on a lot of the choices that he makes, I find the personality that he has and the way that he is so inept with to social norms to be incredibly fascinating. But he ends up, through that lens, bringing multiple themes and sides of other people's personalities into light and making them think about themselves in different ways. Siobhan sees herself as a nice person. She knows her brother is nice, even though he's a little dull, but she recognizes that, he's not that dull when he's put next to Dominic. And maybe she's not that nice because she's very hesitant about this young man who's just been abused, like letting him stay one night in his house. Like, each of these characters have the way that they think of themselves, and Dominic is so simple-minded that he doesn't, I don't even know if he thinks about himself, but he makes everyone else reconsider the way in which they see themselves, which I think is really important to this film, evolving each of the characters.
It's interesting because I don't necessarily think I really think of Dominic, it seems, in the way that you do. I don't really think he's complacent necessarily in his beating or anything. If anything, he's quite he rebels against his father multiple times in the stealing of the drink, for instance. First of all, walking in, he's like, if you wake my dad when he's been wanking, he'll beat the shit out of you. That scene is so fucking funny when they go to steal the drink for the first time. But he does it again later in the film. I think what Dominic has is this sort of desire, and I think this is pretty clear, desire to be loved by somebody. And to me, I think his entire character is about trying to find that. And there's this sort of optimism in him that his father can't quite beat out of him. Yeah. And so I don't view him as simple at all, actually. I view him as I think what's interesting to your point about bringing him into conversation with other characters is it almost seems like Pedrick can find an extreme of himself in Dominic, of wanting to be loved and wanting somebody, right? And then the moment in which he finally does ask Siobhan if she'd be interested in loving somebody like me someday, it feels like that's the culmination of everything that he has been misguidedly trying to be up until that point in the film. And I have Twitter, so I had been told, you watch this 90-minute sec of Barry Keoghan and you'll see that he deserves to win the Oscar. And I didn't watch the clip ever because I knew I was going to see the movie.
Yeah.
And I think they're right. I think it's an exceptional scene, and I think it betrays everything that Dominic puts a front to try to avoid. His sort of rudeness towards women is creepy. I believe he's told by Pedrick, doesn't matter if you're rude, but don't be creepy towards my sister or whatever.
On both accounts.
He fails on both accounts. But when he lets his guard down, then, the sort of guard he puts up to survive the abuse that he faces, and is then nonetheless met with rejection, I think that scene is so deeply cutting. And then the implication that he probably killed himself after that, I think is very powerful. That last chord of optimism that he was holding on to just snaps, and then he's done, and there's nothing else for him.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to Pedrick for somebody who's going to be nice to him, and then when he reveals what he said about the bread van, he's like, I thought you were nice and you're not. I don't have anybody now. I think he's a very sad character.
Mm-hmm. I think I think it almost makes you feel bad about laughing at him is when he used the hook on the stick that he found at the beginning to drag. They use that to drag his body out of the lake there, and it does make you feel bad for laughing when he says, "Oh, foiled again. There goes that dream," and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Because Barry Keoghan delivers those lines with such heartbreak and just the characterization. I can't even put a word on it. The characterization he brings to Dominic, that you laugh in the moment, but you look back and you feel bad for laughing. Just like many of the people in the town would, honestly. I mean, he's the village idiot, as I sort of introduced him as when I was giving my summary, and that's what everyone views him as. Siobhan says, "Yeah, you're not the stupidest one. That's Dominic by a mile." And then, but they focus on that and not the clear and blatant abuse that he's facing from his father, not only physical but also clearly sexual as well, violence and abuse. But no, he's just the village idiot, and we all point and laugh at him for being the village idiot. And I feel like that's a microcosm of like the niceness and everything like that this film is concerned with, and also maybe some of the Irishness of being like constrained, keeping your issues to yourself, not wanting to get in anybody's business, and not wanting anybody in your business.
Yeah, let's talk quickly about Siobhan, and then we can move on to sort of wrap up where we're.
Yeah.
Time has come, not in any imminent moment, but it's coming to a close here.
It's coming soon.
I think that Siobhan is a very, very well done character, like all the other ones. And her performance by Kerry Condon is really well done. Those moments, I think, that are her standout moments is where we get the different kind of relationship. Because up until now, we've been talking about these like found relationships. You choose your friends sometimes, and sometimes they choose you. But this time, Pedrick and Siobhan are brother and sister, and so this familial relationship plays out a little differently in the film than these others. And the moment where she I think it's a couple times, she goes and confronts Colm about what's going on because it's just as stupefying to her. She kind of gets where he's coming from, but certainly she must not agree with it or be happy about that her brother's just like lost his friend. And those moments in which she gets up in Colm's face are very powerful, and I think demonstrate some of that, I think the love that is felt between those two characters that I don't know what happens with the love between them later in the movie. But I think that as a rounding out of our cast, of our 4-character cast and the different types of relationships, she's very well placed in the script and in the story, and I like her.
Yeah. What one of you said earlier that Podrick was kind of the audience in, and the more I think about that, the less I agree. Actually, I never agreed, but now I'm explicitly disagreeing. Is I actually do think that it's Siobhan, because I think she is the one that is much more clear thinking than everyone. The other 3 characters, they're doing extreme things. They're mentally handicapped in some way. They don't understand social norms. But she comes into a scene and she brings a confidence, an understanding, and empathy to where yes, she's annoyed by people, but she knows that she can maybe talk to them a little bit. She comes into a scene, and even though Colm wants nothing to do, very explicitly multiple times with Padre, he respects Siobhan. And when she comes in and talks to him, they have a genuine conversation, and they really get into the nitty gritty of why are you making this choice? No, that's not good. There's a balance that she brings between everyone that I think makes her my favorite character in the film. Is she's the one to me that feels very real and genuine. Is she's got her problems, but she understands that in order to make things better, whether it's for the people around her or for herself, she has to make difficult decisions. She has to go up to a guy twice her size that might do something violent to her and say, hey, no, you shouldn't be doing this. You need to be more respectful. For herself, she makes a decision this is not healthy for me. I need to leave. And watching her come to grips with that decision and recognize that she can do more with her life is endlessly fascinating to me. And so she's not my favorite performance in the film. As I said, that honor goes to Barry Keoghan, but she's my favorite characters. I find her reactions to the crazy things around her, whether it's how simple Podrick is or how ridiculous what Dominic and Colm are doing, to be where the themes of the film, the character moments are at their most rich, is whenever Siobhan is on screen.
Yeah. I also like Carrie Condon in this. I really gained an appreciation for her and her performance on this rewatch. And the scene that you're talking about, Tucker, I think the key thing for me there is when she says, I just don't understand why you're doing this. She says that to Colm, and Colm just answers back with, really? You don't? And then you see that recognition on her face. She's like, I share the exact same fears and discomforts of being complacent, on being trapped on this island, on not fulfilling any purpose that I feel that I have. And that's why she leaves. And you're right, Tucker, in that she's like, it's healthier for me to leave than do what Colm is doing. But yeah. Colm is just farther down that road. He's farther down that road. He's an old man at this point, and she has prospects. She gets a job on the mainland, whereas Colm doesn't have those opportunities.
At a library. Just like me for real.
She's just like you for real. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that she's also just that her befuddlement is. I'm gonna steal a word from the beginning, and her. Just the fact that she's so done with all of this ridiculousness comes across in that performance as well. Especially with people like Barry Keoghan being creepy to her when they're having dinner, and she's like, "Wild? What do you mean by that, wild?" And she's
great scene.
Yeah, she is freaking out because she's like, everyone is just so. She's just annoyed by everyone on this island and how they act, and she's like, I have to get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah, she sort of escapes the sadness that nobody else can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the scene that I really love featuring her is when she's preparing the porridge, and she goes into the kitchen, and she's got to push the donkey off of the table, and then she reflects on the letter and this opportunity, and these moments you get of her realizing that I'm going to be more than this, I think are quite effective. She finds herself in a very similarly socially precarious situation as her brother when the police officer says to her, yeah, no wonder nobody likes you. And we sort of see the toll that takes on her, and the sort of heartbreak of the awakening into the scene with Colin Farrell and hearing her cry in the bed next to him. I think you want her to escape. I think it's very easy, to Tima's point before about finding empathy for Colm. I think it's most easy to find empathy for her.
Absolutely.
And a sort of happiness, but one that's nonetheless tinged with the melancholy of leaving her brother, as she's the only character in the film to ever put on a bright color.
Yeah,
she puts
I was just about to mention that.
her yellow jacket and leaves on the boat and waves to her brother on the ridge. I think it's very effectively done.
Yeah. And it's her bringing that spark of life to the film that does, as I said, just because she's my favorite character, make me like those scenes so much. And it is reflected in the color choice of this movie, which is such rich greens and browns and grays, and it's so unique and so distinct and really makes this place feel otherworldly. I've never seen walls of stones this color cut and stacked that high and
over. Oh, I thought you were talking about the cliffs, but the little the waist high stone walls that are all throughout Ireland and the UK that were built there like 1,000 years ago and were constructed so soundly that they still stand to this day. Yeah, it's really cool. It's a really cool location to set this thing in.
It's just stunning. I mean, last summer I went to go to England and I got to go to Scotland, and it's not quite Ireland, but they look pretty similar. They're pretty close to each other in
Pretty close.
global scale. And
Really?
man, it's just so beautiful. Like every single shot feels just bathed in this like golden, like the sun has come now below the clouds and is like simultaneously bouncing off the underside of the clouds and then shining this beautiful light all over the place. And like, they go and sit, and then they've got like the world's most scenic pub location ever. They're sitting outside and they're just like drinking their Guinness and looking out on this like absolutely unfathomably beautiful landscape. I think that there might be some commentary to be made on a contrast between the way that the landscape is so serene and like
Immaculate.
and peaceful, really, and then there's the humanity that lives within the landscape that is so in turmoil and full of strife and unable to really find any harmony, it seems.
Yeah. I think it's telling that how affecting this location is just on a personal level. That after we watched this film in the theaters, I distinctly remember. I think it was Tucker. We were planning a sort of a spring break trip. We were trying to pick a locale, and Tucker said, "Why don't we go to Ireland?"
Let's go to Ireland.
I think the day after we watched this movie, he's like, that'd be fucking great because it's just beautiful out there.
And then it was going to be like $1,300 a ticket.
Exactly,
And like, we're just college students. We can't swing that.
No. So we landed on the Ireland of the United States, Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas, baby. But of course, that ties into the cinematography of the entire film is just stellar. I mean, I keep thinking my favorite shot, I think maybe of the entire film is it's a nighttime. We are in Colm's bedroom after he's cut off his finger. And he sort of like lifts it into the moonlight and it casts a shadow.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's just a cool ass shot right there.
He's like doing this, and you can see the no finger, like
the finger's missing,
reflected against the wall.
Oh yeah, really cool.
Yeah,
great moment.
I want to just mention the fingers. The actual finger props and the finger slicing. That's all very. It's all very. Yeah, it gives me the ick like crazy. But his like fingerless hand prosthetic does not look the best. I feel like
I don't think so.
I love the opposite of that.
I love how it looks. I love that the stumps are uneven. Like the middle finger is like longer than the rest of the stumps because he's doing it as he's cutting all of his fingers off.
It's
so
just
it's not gonna
I
be
don't know,
perfect.
something about the way that it like sat on his arm and his body. It's just like it didn't.
Oh sure.
It looked like he was had his hand inside of a fist thing, and then there was looked like a prosthetic to me, which was unfortunate. But
I want to talk about the cinematography also as a tool for visual storytelling. There's a couple, again, sort of going back to the literal fork in the road. It's not especially subtle all the time, but I think reinforcing your themes and narrative through visuals is just an incredibly important affordance of film in general. There's this sort of there's this very small and repeated conflict between Pedrick and Siobhan about whether or not the donkey can be in the house.
Yes.
And
not putting it outside when I'm sad.
Right, exactly that. We get that line, which we sit with for a while, and then after she's left, there are these moments where there are just animals throughout the entire house. Just these wide shots of a room, and there's like a fucking horse and a cow walking around.
Platypus, zebra, donkey, giraffe, rhino, toad.
Or the moment when we have Pedrick sort of narrating his return letter. We see him lying sad in bed, asking
and the
for
horse
his
is
sister to
looking
come
at him.
home.
Yeah.
And there's just an animal in the room. I think that's really effective. I also think it's really effective, again, this repeated motif of this separation by mirrors, and there's a lot of shots framed to around characters' faces. There's this moment when Colin Farrell is sitting between two pieces of clothes on the clothesline that frame him in the center, or the shots of Colm in the confessional booth through the window. It's all very intimate and close to the face, but then the moment of Pedrick smashing his mirror and he can no longer see himself. He's not the same guy anymore, and suddenly there's a lot of a lot of page breaks in the mirror, in the broken mirror. Again, it's not very subtle, but A, it's incredibly beautiful, and B, I think it's a nice way to tacitly reinforce the journeys your characters are taking.
Yeah.
And a lot of films simply don't use the camera that way. So I think it's important to shout that out.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, it wasn't nominated for cinematography, but do we have any quick thoughts on like the editing or the score? The other two nominations that we had.
Score's very good.
Score's very
I think
good.
the score is very good because it's so distinct. We talked about this place feeling so culturally and visually distinct from our own, that reflected in the cinematography and the color grading and the culture that we're learning about, but it also is reflected in the score, which is it's not a kind of score that I've ever heard before. It's like basically all like marimbas and xylophones and glockenspiels, and like it's all composed out of just those kinds of instruments, and I think that makes it feel like, well, hold on, no, where are like the trumpets and the strings? Like we're so used to those being what film scores are that like stripping it back to one kind of instrument, one genre of instrument, really made it feel super distinct to me. I think that it could have been a little more varied. There's a lot of the very similar musical cues played over and over again, and at a certain point I was like, yeah, okay, I've heard this before, but what's there I absolutely love. So love the score quite a bit.
Let's pull up that score sheet.
I think it's the perfect segue.
We need to do this every time.
Yeah.
Every time.
Well,
boys.
I was gonna say the editing is just super good as well. I mean, it stands out the most, especially in those comedy sequences when we're doing what's the opposite of licks, huh? Just the cutting back and forth sells those jokes. But anyway, scores.
I have
I'm thinking.
my number inputted. I thought about it, and
Okay.
I feel good about the number that I'm going to give it. So let's find out if we're going to give this film a 9.2 or an 8.5 in 3, 2, 1.
Let's do it. Oh!
Don't do it.
Look at
We've got a
this.
third number. There's no tie today. We're finally able to freaking give a film a different score. We gave it an 8.7. So it's going to go
No deliberation this time. Thank
no
God.
deliberation. It'll go in between Tar and Avatar, and yeah. The score breakdown
That's it.
is Tanner gave it a 9.0, followed by Abrams. Oh no, Abram gave it a 9.5. Tanner gave it a 9.0. Then Tucker and I both gave it an 8.2.
Good scores all around. We actually have no bad scores yet.
There's no bad movies
out of the
here.
6 movies that we see. Great point. Yes, it's crazy. It's crazy.
So the Banshees of Inisherin is going to go at number 4 on our list. Since we're pretty far into it now. I'm just going to run down the list really quickly to just remind you of what's at stake here. So our top 3 films tied at 9.2 points, but numerically adjusted so that they're in order right now. Everything Everywhere All at Once, and then All Quiet on the Western Front, followed by Tar, and then our newest arrival, Banshees of Inisherin, then Avatar, then Elvis, and then the next movie that's going to go on the list. Which one is it going to be?
It is going to be Triangle of Sadness. A bit of a surprise Best Picture nomination this time around. It was bringing up the last 2 spots here, but another one that Tucker and I have seen. Timo, you mentioned that you've seen half of this film.
Yeah, so I was having a particularly bad day last fall, and I was like, I don't know, I was feeling kind of sick. Stomach was kind of upset and just stressed about school or whatever.
Well,
you'll see where this one's going.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to watch a movie and take my mind off myself, you know? Okay, I'll watch Triangle. I've been wanting to watch this film. So I load it up, and I'm watching it. I'm enjoying it. And then we get halfway through, and the ship starts rocking, and these rich people start barfing, and my stomach is like, no, I don't want to watch this.
Not the kind of film that you want to watch on an upset stomach.
And so I paused it at
My
the
dad
middle.
left during that scene as well.
I paused it in the middle, and I didn't pick it back up. So this time around, I'll have to start it at the beginning. I'll get to see the second half or the first half for a second time, and the second half for a first time.
Yes.
It was like
Timo, you stopped in a particularly special place because you have no clue what the rest of this movie is going
absolutely
to be.
none.
Will
I don't know.
completely-
Yeah, that'll be
will
a
completely
surprise.
change what you think of this movie. Because is there a film with more distinct 2 halves? I have no idea.
Yeah. But yeah, Ruben Östlund's Triangle of Sadness, available for rental and
Starring
purchase.
Woody Harrelson.
Starring Woody Harrelson, Harris Dickinson, Sharbley Dean is in this one. Rest in peace, of course. But yes, available for purchase and rental on VOD. if you want to watch along with.
Yeah. So until
better.
we join that super yacht, until then, we'll see you next
yeah.
time. Peace.